Welcome to Grown Between Worlds, a podcast for adult children of immigrants and the people who love them. We're here to hold real conversations about identity, belonging, love, and life across cultures.
And we're committed to creating a space that feels grounding, honest, and human. Each conversation here touches on sensitive themes, which may feel deep or tender. We invite you to listen or watch at your own pace and take good care of yourself.
I'm Forouz.
And I'm Miranda. We're so glad you're on this journey with us.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's episode. Today's guest is Rayan Anton. He is a queer trans Palestinian man and the child of an immigrant family who moved to Canada in the early 1990s. He is a registered social worker and psychotherapist working predominantly with queer and trans youth of color, many of whom are also from immigrant families. He's also a parent to a young child and is often thinking about what it means to hold on to cultural identity for himself and to pass it on to his son in a society that is determined to erase Palestinian culture and identity. Welcome, Rayan. We're so happy to have you here today.
Hi, Forouz. Thanks for having me.
So tell us a bit about what your personal connection is to immigration.
Yeah, so as I said, my bio, I'm the child of an immigrant family. So we came here when I was 2, and we came from Palestine. And this might come up a few times in this conversation, but we came from like the parts of Palestine that we refer to as the 48 land. So the parts that are currently claimed by Israel. So it's not like the West Bank, it's not Gaza. So which is why we had, in many ways, the privilege to immigrate. But at the same time, as you can imagine, it's kind of, so I call it a bit of a forced migration, because my family was definitely seeking safety. So my family and we came here when I was young, and took a pretty long time to get Canadian citizenship for reasons that are complex. And again, because I'm from as I said, the 48 land, I did have the privilege of being able to go back and visit quite a bit as a kid. So while I didn't live there for years, I do have a strong connection to the homeland, and I spent a lot of time there and familiar with getting around. So yeah, I wouldn't say I'm an immigrant myself, but I kind of get the experience of living between two worlds. That part, yes.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I can understand that being so young, you probably didn't have, conscious or vivid memories of the actual immigration process and maybe the early settlement process. But I'm sure you've kind of felt the impacts of it in different ways throughout your life.
Yeah, that's something we talk about even in therapy sessions with my clients. Is we might not have conscious memories of these things, but they definitely played a role in our formation and in our nervous systems. And also I think growing up and seeing your parents go through immigration, which is hard on anyone who's immigrated, I'm sure can attest to this. It's just such a difficult process, and seeing that has an impact on the kids. So that's why childhood immigrants makes more sense for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So tell us now, as an adult, what is the cultural, ethnic, or national identity that you claim, and how was your journey at arriving at this identity?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So now when I introduce myself, or when I talk about myself, I say I'm Palestinian, um, and a Palestinian settler here in so-called Canada. Uh, and this is such an interesting question because over my life, it's changed so many times. I remember when I was a kid and we came to Canada. I remember Palestine being a constant topic in the home. We're Palestinian, and talking about the displacement and all that stuff. But I noticed after the years went on, and I think my parents were getting used to being here, I noticed they were talking about it less. And I remember one time my mom saying, "Don't tell anyone you're Palestinian." And I can't remember how old I was. I was under the age of 10. And I remember being pretty confused about that because until that point, it was something we were kind of proud of. So then to be told, "Don't tell anyone I'm Palestinian," and there was no explanation, was pretty confusing. And I can't remember. I was like, "Well, what do I tell her that we are?" And I don't remember what she said. I think she said you could say you're white, and I was like, "Well, are we white?" Anyway, a whole conversation about that. And then I'm a relatively I do look white, could pass in many white cultures. So I think for many years when I was a kid, I didn't not identify as Palestinian, and I I didn't identify as anything weirdly. I think I knew I was Arab. So the
Mhm.
word Arab also got floated around as a more like an umbrella term that I fit into, but was not as vulnerable as Palestinian. So
Mm.
these days I do identify as Arab, as Palestinian, and those words both feel accurate for me. Sometimes I will say that I'm also like from a Christian Palestinian background, um, which is something that is like a tricky one because on the one hand, it is an accurate description of who my family is, and it does feel culturally significant.
Mhm.
And there's been a lot of erasure of Christian Palestinians in like media and I also don't want people to assume I'm Muslim just because I'm not, and I would be falsely claiming that. But I usually don't say that I'm Christian Palestinian because that has also been a narrative that's been used to boost Islamophobia. There's like
Mm.
and I would not want to be, to me, like Christian and Muslim Palestinians are both just Palestinian, and that's how I experience our culture. But it in the Middle East, Christianity has also been used as in a superiority sort of way, I think. So anyway, that was a very long answer to my identity. So these days, I just say Palestinian.
Mm, okay. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And you're right. Like, there is so much complexity to our identities, and they are very multifaceted. And it's hard to kind of find just one or two or a few different words that accurately represents who we actually are, and even like accurately and effectively communicates any real thing about us.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
And I can relate to kind of that conversation of, don't really talk about kind of where you're
Oh, yeah.
from. I think for me, from my family, was after 9/11 that
Mhm,
we started to have this conversation when I was a teenager around, don't necessarily identify openly as Iranian, just don't talk about it at all. And so I remember for the majority of my adolescence, because of kind of the is the rise in Islamophobia and kind of discrimination against people from the Swana region, the southwestern
mhm,
Asia and North Africa, or also many people call Middle East,
mhm,
that it didn't always feel safe to claim my Iranian identity as well. And because, like you, I'm also very like white passing. I kind of didn't say anything, and for many many years, I was often read as, from South
so many
America, from
places.
Central
Yeah,
America,
yeah.
I was read as like Portuguese or
Mm.
Spanish or Greek or Italian, and I didn't really correct people for many years until I was like an adult, even in my
Mhm,
early adulthood, to finally be like, no, I'm of Iranian descent. I immigrated from Iran. I have conscious memory of that. I'm also settled like you in Canada, and I have Canadian citizenship as well. So I guess I'm Iranian Canadian.
mhm,
Yeah.
mhm. Oh, I didn't know that you had such a similar experience with that part. Yeah, it's good to talk about these things. I don't think I had friends who understood that experience um, growing up. But I mean, to your point, I think I understand now why my mom said don't tell people you're Palestinian. She didn't explain, which is not her fault. She was probably doing her best. But it
Yeah.
was probably because of 9/11, you know,
Yeah.
which is why also back to like the religion piece because in a way, although I'm not Muslim, I do kind of in some ways experience Islamophobia because people just assume I'm Muslim and therefore I sort of experience it, even though I'm not technically. So I think well, I mean, I think the Islamophobia since 9/11 and before it, I'm sure has affected a lot of people, even like South Asian people who are like Hindu experience
Yeah.
Islamophobia because everyone just, white people lump all sort of brown people into like one category. Um, yeah, such a harmful experience for all of us. Mhm,
Yeah, there's this definitely this like conflation happening between these different kind of identities, regions of the world, experiences. And a lot of it is like very much fear based, right? In the cultures and communities and countries and societies that we've settled after immigration.
mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Um, how do you think your immigrant background has shaped the choices that you've made in love, career, or life overall? And has that influence shifted over time for you?
Also a great question. Yes. So I feel like there's many points in my life in which it has affected it in different ways. Um, I will say something we haven't talked too much about also is like internalized racism, because I think that's also
Mm,
been part of it. I think when I in my younger years, around like grade school, I think especially with comments from my mom saying things like "Don't tell people you're Palestinian." I definitely would say in retrospect I experienced internalized racism, and kind of sort of also perceived myself as sort of white. Um, and I think that influenced my decisions. And at the same time, um, the other part of me, which we haven't talked too much about, is my queerness, and uh, which I was aware of from a very young age, maybe age 10. And that definitely took up a lot of space for me. And, at the time, and still, there's this like notion that only white people get to be queer,
mm,
which is literally a quote from my mom. She's like, "We don't have this back home," and I was like, "Yes, we do. We have queer people everywhere, obviously." But you know, so at the time, I was very much like distancing myself from like the Palestinian immigrant family part that I felt a bit of shame around.
mm,
My parents both have accents, and I kind of felt like they didn't really get things here. Um, and that was very sad in retrospect to have created so much distance. And at the same time, my queerness was feeling very important to me. So I made a lot of life decisions on I need to find a place where I can be queer. It doesn't feel like that's my family. So I went and I ran away to university in like a very white sort of town,
mm,
um, and just sort of pretended to be white for many years. Um, so yeah, immigration family influenced me that way. I ran away from it for a while,
mhm,
but then I spent 5 years in that sort of setting, and then I realized something else was missing. I was like, wait a second, something doesn't feel quite right. I don't feel like I really belong here either. Like I found a big queer community, and that was really awesome and really formative, and I'm glad I found them. But then it was a mostly white queer community, um, and then I felt something else was missing. I thought, okay, well, so let me go back to the GTA, where my people are, where there's more diversity. Um, and then it was when returning here, and then it, the pivotal moments of my life were finding other queer Arabs, and that just changed everything for me. That made me feel like I can be queer and Arab, and that was the first time in my life I would think I felt like I was living actually authentically and not in fear of something. Mhm.
thanks for sharing that, yeah. I think what you're touching on is that we sometimes need a bit of spaciousness from different influences or different aspects of our lived experiences and identity to be able to have the opportunity and sometimes the safety to really better understand a different aspect of our identity and kind of lean into it more and bring more nuance to it and clarify it for ourselves before kind of starting to integrate it into other aspects of our identity as well, right? Like this like Venn diagram of who we are, that it takes us some time to really distill out all the different parts, understand it, feel through it, and see the
Mhm.
interconnections between it before we kind of land in that middle of that Venn diagram and can really kind of start to claim and express all these different multifaceted parts of ourselves together.
Mhm. I agree. Sometimes space is the thing that you need to get perspective. It's hard to, I'm sure there's an expression somewhere. It's hard to see the thing when you're like drowning in it, you know? So yeah, I agree with you on that.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Um, and how was this perceived by your immigrant family and community when you did take the spaciousness and then also when you kind of came back into the GTA, into the Greater
Oh,
Toronto area?
yeah, they found that very hard.
Mm,
To them, it's something that I realize is that as a younger person, there's a lot of cultural values that are in Arab and Palestinian culture that are actually really beautiful values. Like something we haven't talked much about is like collectivist culture versus more individualistic
mhm,
culture. And I'm realizing now that a lot of these things that I experienced as like bad pressure were really kind of collectivist culture values, but they were being used in a way that was not working for me. So I think for me, like to leave home at the age of 17 or 18 was, unspoken of in my family. It was you only left home when you were married and you had saved for a down payment and, things like
mhm,
that. So you know, I mean, by then I was already quite the rebellious child. I had like, lots of things. I think they probably weren't surprised, but at that point that they saw that coming. But yeah, it was a big grief and a big loss for my family. There were a lot of confusion, and they tried to stop me many times. Um, but I was pretty strong-willed, and so I did that. And then when I came back after 5 years, yeah, well, they didn't recognize me partially because I also started transitioning gender-wise. That's another topic.
Mm.
So it's kind of like I went one way and I came back as kind of a totally different person to them. Um, yeah, that was hard.
Mhm.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like it was challenging for both you and for them because the
Mhm.
spaces that you needed to take kind of I think it highlights kind of what happens when we immigrate and leave our communities and extended families in the countries that
Mhm.
we immigrate from, that our sense of each other kind of gets frozen in time in a
Yeah,
way.
that's true.
Right?
Yes.
And so even and you kind of re-experience that even with your own family after immigration because you took this 5-year time away in a different town and were kind of exploring a different aspect of your identity, your queer and trans identity.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a good reminder about also, yeah, even though I was young when we first came to Canada, I have a lot of memories of also leaving back home. And I remember, I think I was maybe 18 years old. Well, I was 21 years old when I last went to Palestine, and I
Mm.
remember I remember being in the airplane flying back to Canada and crying, which I don't cry very much. It was a notable moment for me, and
Mm.
something inside of me was like, "This is the last time I'm going to see these people," and thinking that, and like the and you could see it coming because when we first moved to Canada, we would go every year, every 2 years, and then it was every 4 years, every 5 years. And I was like, okay, something's changing, and uh, this would be like a bigger divide. And I was right. That's the last time I had been there. So I do plan to go back, but I mean, God willing, with everything
Mhm.
happening. But um, but you're right. I think there's also like there's a fear to go back, and my mom's talked about this. In my mind, I'm going to go back and everything's going to be the same. I know it's not, but in my mind, I'm like, my grandparents' farm will still be there, and I will still recognize, the streets of Haifa, and my family will still have all this time for me. But the reality is, it's been 15 years, and probably none of that is true. So while I am going to go back, I'm mostly preparing for it to be quite different, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. What does that preparation look like for you?
Hmm. Yeah, a bit of like a bracing, preemptive grieving. Like, I don't wanna get there and then be sad for the first time, so I'm kind of, like, I guess, preemptively grieving the things that I think I'm not gonna see. I'm also leaving some openness, maybe there'll be some new experiences that I didn't have before that I'll get to appreciate, of course, but yeah, but, like, yeah, I cannot bring back the past, so I guess preemptively grieving is the answer.
Yeah, and perhaps the grieving, this kind of like preemptive or anticipatory grief,
Mhm,
um, is actually making some room for some new possibilities and new
mhm.
memories to be formed as well.
That's true. That's true. Mhm,
Yeah. Yeah. I think grieving is a significant part of, I think, the immigrant experience
mhm,
for many generations of immigrants in different ways. But in particular, when you have ongoing or at least to some degree of connection back to a homeland, that when we are apart from it, those places don't actually freeze in time, right? They
mhm,
go through their natural changes constantly. And then even more so when there's also geopolitical issues or
mhm.
environmental issues kind of impacting them as well. So
Yeah.
these images that we have in our mind and that are connected to how we see ourselves, and the visions that we have of our lives and our lineage, are not um, they're not as nuanced because they're not necessarily changing in time with with
Mhm,
the things and the people that are changing from the places that we've left behind.
mhm. Yeah. And it's complicated because you can understand wanting to hold on to them, but if you hold on too much, well, it's room for disappointment there, you know? Grief is interesting because I even have, for example, like friends and clients who grieve a homeland they've never been to.
Mm.
And when they talk about it, it almost feels like the same grief that for people who have left their homeland. And this is maybe the intergenerational grief part as well. I mean, there's the grief of like being like a person of color here in this land that they experience, and walking around and not getting to see a culture that resonates with the one that your family had. Um, but also, I do think we take on our parents' grief, seeing all of our parents listen to the music from back home or talk to their loved ones on the phone and cry and miss them. And I think we acquire that grief from them as well. Yeah.
Yeah. What has that looked like for, like, some of the clients that you work with? And how do they find a way through it, if at all?
Well, I mean, yeah, diverse. For example, I have some friends and probably some clients who did for the first time in their lives go to visit their homelands as adults. For those
Mm.
that it was possible for not everyone has that option, especially some Palestinians who
Mhm.
were not born there, like I was. As I have that privilege to do that. Um, yeah, so some people have managed to go back as adults, and from what I've heard, it's been a really remarkable experience. Very something they really valued, and then for some clients who can't go back, or some friends who also can't go back, yeah, just more grief, I guess. Sometimes I think folks like that have like an imposter syndrome. They're like, am I really Palestinian or Iranian or whatever if I've never even been there? Um, and even I can ask myself the same question. Like, I'm Palestinian, but I'm Palestinian here, or in a way, I'm Palestinian until like the age of like 10 because that's the time I actually like really spent there. But I think one can be Palestinian or anything in many different ways. There's no one form of it. I'm definitely Palestinian living in diaspora, which is different from being Palestinian living in Palestine. Um,
Mhm.
Although we have, of course, roots in common, but the lived experience is pretty different. You know, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely relate to that, and the imposter syndrome as well, even though, like you, I was born in Iran. I was, 8 years old before we left, 9 before we arrived in Canada. Um, and yet, I don't necessarily always feel Iranian enough for a lot of, like, Iranian spaces,
Mhm.
even in the diaspora, like Iranian
Oh, even in the
community
diaspora.
spaces. Yeah,
Yeah.
even here, I don't necessarily feel
Hmm.
I'm maybe expressive enough of my Iranianness, or
Hmm.
maybe connected to it in ways that other people seem to be, that, uh, I don't know, seems to I at least in I get the sense that I'm maybe not doing it right.
Yeah, I got that feeling. Yeah, it's an interesting. Well, like we could value that, like there is a culture to it, and it's that it looks like, and at the same time, no one should ever feel like they're not actually the thing that they are. Like you're nothing but Iranian. Like obviously you're here now, but your blood and your roots and your family is Iranian. So yeah, I mean, but this like in a way that this is a interesting question. I think I was just thinking I never made this relationship in my head before, but I think about like gender as well. So I'm a
Mhm.
trans man, and I like identifying as a trans man because, well, for so many reasons. A, it's accurate. B, I want, as someone who has the privilege of kind of passing all the time, I want to take up space for trans people in the world because I have the safety to do so, and I like to do that. But um, this may be a controversial topic, but some people ask, like, what is a real man? Are trans men real men? And it's a very
Mm.
interesting topic because, I mean, my views on gender are much more broad than that. I don't really believe in anything like that. But, you know, yeah, I consider myself a real man in the sense that, like, all trans men are real men. But I also, like, don't because I don't have the exact same experience as a cis man, but not in, like, a less than way. It's just like these are two different paths
Mhm.
to the same man social structure. I wouldn't say I'm exactly the same as cis men, but I'm definitely still a man, and I feel comfortable with that. The same way as a Palestinian here, I'm not exactly the same as Palestinians there, but we're both still Palestinian, just different experiences, I guess. So yeah, I guess I see my gender and Palestinianness in similar ways.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, that's a really, interesting kind of, comparison that you just made, that there are different pathways through which we arrive at the same identity, but our lived experiences, even while claiming the same identities, could be vastly different.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
anyone, honestly. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and I often, I think, wonder about what is kind of like that quality of difference between people who chose to immigrate in adulthood, even if they were, forced to flee a particular place, and when that experience was done in adulthood and they had more conscious awareness of it,
Mhm,
and some level of kind of consenting and decision making. What is that difference compared to those of us who came as kids,
right.
and as teens that were kind of like brought with our families, perhaps,
Mhm,
or then were born in these new societies within our immigrant families. Like,
mhm,
what is that difference? I mean, I can answer it to a degree. I think I more notice it when I talk to folks who might actually be in the same age group or generation as me, but they immigrated as adults compared to
mhm,
immigrating as a child like myself. And I wonder sometimes if the way in which I'm expressing my Iranian identity, or the way that I'm not expressing it, maybe outwardly enough, is maybe activating some grief for them. And I
mhm,
wonder if a part of that is, if that's a part of why there might sometimes be this disconnect between us as well.
mhm,
That we do have very different lived experiences, and that for them, perhaps witnessing someone growing up in a diaspora and not enacting or living or practicing all the different aspects of the culture, that it can be painful for them to
mhm.
witness.
Yeah, I can imagine that's true. Yeah, that's interesting. And at the same time, them coming here and enacting those things might also open them up to more discrimination, which mm, is something that we don't have to deal with. Yeah. Mhm. Um, and I think I'm not an adult immigrant, so I can't speak to it too much. But I know many folks who are, and there's also many stages of like grief there. Like the first year that you're here, the first five
Mhm.
years, and then I was talking to my mom one day, and she has been here for how old do I know? Anyway, over 30 years, because she came when I was just born,
Uh-huh.
and she looked at me one day. She said, I think I'm like kind of Canadian now. And I was like, what does that mean, first of all? But she was like, well, I've been here, like half my life has now been in Palestine and half of it has now been in Canada. At this point, I don't really feel like I'm like I do feel like part of me belongs here now also. And now when she goes back there, she's like, oh, I don't really recognize this place anymore. Like I don't belong here either. And so anyway, yeah, it's interesting to see how her experience of immigration over the years has shifted also.
Yeah, and that the experience of belonging shifts over
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And that in order for us to be able to survive anywhere, we have to be able to kind of
Mhm.
cultivate some level of belonging,
Yes,
because we
that's true.
rely on one another for survival, whether we're consciously aware of it or not.
Right, exactly. Yeah, yeah, which is why I think when maybe immigrants first come here and they see folks like us who are so kind of whitewashed, might feel confusing, but then after you're here for 20 years, yeah, it's hard to fight every day, you know? Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's room to practice our cultures and our religious and spiritual backgrounds, in different ways in a host culture or society that we've settled into, but also the demands of daily life and
mhm,
the structures of another society don't make that as easy necessarily, right? Even for like something as simple as, for instance, practicing holidays, right?
mhm,
That we don't necessarily have, unless you are practicing Christian, but also have the exact same Christian holidays as are practiced maybe in North America. You don't necessarily have the exact same experience and connection, as others do here.
yeah, even being from a Christian background, it's different. We celebrate Christmas Eve, which other Orthodox Christians do, but also like I think a lot of our church masses are like in the evening, and they're at like an Arabic speaking church, and so even though we're Christians, like we still had to find a way to bring our culture with us, here. Um, in Palestine, we don't read the Bible in English, so
Hmm.
yeah, um, for sure. Well,
Yeah. Yeah, language is a part of how we experience and express the different parts of ourselves as well. So, even like the example that you're giving of like reading the Bible in Arabic is going to be very different than reading the Bible in English or in Latin or any other language.
Speaking of language, I was curious. Do you speak any uh, language other than English still? Because you came
Uh,
here when you were older.
I speak Farsi. Yeah,
Mm,
I would say like I speak Farsi fluently, but
okay, makes
the
sense.
reality is that, I speak it with family, and I have some clients who, in sessions with them, our work is fully in Farsi. For me, what I've noticed is that the hardest part is often translating certain
Hmm.
professional terms and things that we use in therapy into English, into Farsi,
Hmm.
effectively. And so I'm either using way too many different words and sentences to explain one
Yeah,
concept or word, or I'm just kind of doing the kind of like Finglish thing where I'm
yeah. You put in the
saying
English
it in
word.
English,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
maybe with like a Farsi accent when I'm
That's
saying
true.
it. Um,
Yeah, that makes sense.
and yeah, so that's been kind of like my experience. And sometimes I think, just kind of like switching channels can be hard in different spaces, and even at different points in time where, for instance, my spouse is English speaking. And so
Mm.
at home now, I primarily speak English. And when I connect with my parents, if I'm connecting with my parents in the presence of my spouse, we're mostly also speaking English to kind of like
Hmm.
be inclusive of my partner. But then we also may have our own like side conversations sometimes in Farsi. And my brother as well, because he was around your age when we arrived in Canada, that our relationship has primarily been in English. We do
Oh, okay.
sometimes speak in Farsi together, but our relationship with each other has
So
primarily been
interesting.
in
You speak your
English.
parents in Farsi and your brother in English, and as a family, I guess you have to speak English. Interesting.
As
Like,
a family, we would speak in Farsi. I think as teenagers, my parents always spoke to us pretty much in Farsi.
okay.
But we would maybe respond to them in
Oh,
English. And then the older that we've gotten, the more we've maybe tried to make sure that we are responding in Farsi and trying to like keep up with the practice. Because yeah, I think like if you don't have the opportunity to use it, like eventually it starts
yeah.
to fall away.
Oh, yeah. I definitely have that experience. My Arabic is like a grade one level now, um, which is actually the age that anyway, well, that English was introduced to me technically, because I
Mm-hmm.
didn't go to school until a bit older, and yeah, I remember in grade one being put in ESL classes, and even as I have one of my earliest memories is of being in ESL classes, and I remember being confused because I speak English, clearly not well enough because I was there, and it's funny to think now I struggle to speak Arabic, even though yeah, yeah, you don't if you don't practice, you lose it. That's for sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But this is an interesting topic. I mean, back to your like question around like how has immigration affected your decisions in life? And one of the questions you had was around love. And that's an also interesting one. I remember back when I was pretending to be white, and I was also around a lot of white people. I ended up just dating a lot of white people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I remember when I came back to Toronto, and I was like, okay, hold on a second, this is not feeling good. Something's feeling off here. And I remember like making more of an active decision to like not only date white people, um, and and yeah, and that's like a big part of also. I have so many thoughts on that, but but it's funny because even I mean, I'm polyamorous, so I do have multiple partners throughout the years. But my current partner, that I live with and have a kid with, and we share a home and everything. I remember when I first met them, I overheard them talking to somebody, and they're like, "Oh, I'm Moroccan," and I was like, "Whoa, like a queer Arab," and I was like excited to hear that. Um, so I remember being interested in that and that piquing my interest. And but then even still, because they're so distant from their Moroccan side and don't speak the language, we're raising a kid together, and he's not gonna know Arabic. I tried to teach my kid Arabic. He did know how to count to 10 when he was younger, but after a while, it was almost like looking at myself. He looked at me, he said, "I'm not speaking that." I was like, "Oh my God, that's what I said to my mom when I was like 12." He's only 2 and he's telling me that. Even at the age of 2, he was aware that this language is not the language we speak at school, and it's like somehow less cool or something like that. Um, so even before he has a grasp of what racism even is, he's already rejected the language, which is wild. We'll see where he
Mm-hmm.
goes. We'll see if he desires to learn it at any point. I'm not sure. Probably not until he's old enough to understand this stuff, and by then it's not too late, but it won't be easy, you know. So this is an interesting topic around. I think most of us of this generation date outside of our original cultures because,
Mhm.
I mean, we don't want to just be dating our own people all the time because there's beauty and diversity. But it does make raising kids not harder, but it does kind of, you have to kind of think about what the culture of the home is going to be, and you don't get to pass on the same traditions. There is some grief around. You won't get to
Yeah.
pass on the same traditions that our parents were able to, or the same language. Uh, But that's why our kids will just have to understand who they are in a more multifaceted sort of way than someone like me did, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I appreciate you sharing that because you're right. We have to make a lot more intentional choices, and
Mhm,
we end up being and have to be selective in some ways about what we do integrate and bring into our households and into the families that we're forming, the new families that we're forming.
mhm.
How do you and your partner, as you're raising your kiddo, like, how do you select what things you kind of integrate in and what things you may not?
Yeah, it's a good question. Um, I think I just bring in the things that feel true to me. You know what I mean? Some of the food I started cooking the traditional dishes again, and I got some good kids books on. Well, it's the thing, the kids books on Palestine, but they're all about the Nakba. It makes sense. But some of them do incorporate more cultural elements and not just the catastrophe. Um, but um, and some of the music. I grew up with a lot of music in my family, so I do try to bring that in. Um, yeah, and then my partner's side. I mean, the Moroccan side is a bit lost to them, unfortunately. So yeah,
Mhm.
mhm, it's a bit
Yeah.
hard with that one.
I think you raise a good point around that, like, especially for a child, the way that they interact with culture is through things that they kind of can understand and have like some kind of a tactile relationship with, whether it's food that they're eating, whether it's music that they can kind of like dance to
Mhm,
perhaps, or books that they can hold and
mhm,
see and read and look at like pictures of, like imagery, and definitely I think
mhm.
is a big part of it.
Sure,
And
as he
then
gets older, we'll have more complex conversations about culture and race and all that stuff.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, of course, right? And as he's kind of understanding his own mixed identity and
Mhm,
all the different things that come with the different lineages.
mhm,
Yeah,
yeah.
very cool. Okay. So to wrap up our conversation, if there had been a guidebook for immigrant kids or teens, what's one piece of advice or wisdom that you would want included in it?
Mhm. So I think I would say that you get to decide what it means to be you. You know,
Mhm.
you get to decide exactly what that looks like. Your family doesn't decide for you, society doesn't decide for you, neither do your friends or partners. You get to take your time and understand all the different places you've come from and who you are, and figure out who you are. Yeah, and no one else gets to decide that for you.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, so you're kind of letting folks know to give themselves permission
Mhm.
and spaciousness in figuring out who they are and making a decision about what identities to claim.
Yeah, they could re-understand it differently over the years and keep re-examining it, um, and that's okay too. Yeah. Mhm.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, Rand, thank you so much for being a guest on Grown Between Worlds and for sharing your story and your wisdom with us today. Thank you.
Thanks, Forouz. Was it nice talking to you?
Thanks again for listening or watching this episode of Grown Between Worlds. We're grateful to share this space and community with you.
Please follow or subscribe to our podcast, share it with people who might resonate, join our newsletter for more info and resources, leave us a comment if you'd like, and join us again for future episodes. And remember, your story matters, your voice matters, and you're not alone. Grown Between Worlds is sponsored by Forouz Salari Online Counseling and Consulting.